from now, I am recording. Okay, so hi everyone, welcome to today's SICS Research Seminar. I'm Simon Wakeling, a lecturer here in the School of Information and Communication Studies, and I'm hosting this session on behalf of the school's research committee. So thank you for everyone for attending. It's great to see so many people here. I'll begin by acknowledging the Wiradjuri, Ngunnawal, Gundungurra and Biripi peoples of Australia, who are the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which CSU's campuses are located, and pay respects to their elders, both past and present. It's really helpful for us to keep a record of who attends these seminars. So if you didn't mind just popping a really quick intro into the chat, sort of who you are and where you're from, that would be really helpful for us. We're going to follow the usual SICS Research Seminar format. So it'll be around a 40 or 45-minute presentation from Judy, and then plenty of time after that for questions. Feel free to type any questions you have into the chat as we go, and I'll collate those. Judy was telling me she's working on a tiny little laptop screen, so she won't be able to monitor the chat, but I'll do that and collate all those questions. So today's seminar is called Create, Curate and Participate, an autoethnography of pathways of digital scholarship in academic leadership of online learning and teaching. And our presenter, of course, is Judy O'Connell. Judy is a senior lecturer and course director in the school here. Her professional background includes extensive leadership work in school education prior to joining the School of Information Studies in 2011. Her work at CSU has also included leading online learning and teaching in the Faculty of Science between 2016 and 2017. And her PhD through the School of Science, Computing and Engineering Technologies at Swinburne will be completed this year. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to you, Judy.
Wonderful, thank you, Simon. And welcome to everybody. I'm looking forward to sharing with you in the short space of time something of my journey, and I will say that in the beginning of the process that occasionally I may go through some slides quickly because these are dual purpose slides, as you can imagine, for a number of my own record keeping purposes and presentations. But I want to share with you the nuggets or the essence of what's happened in the PhD journey, and hopefully something around the method that I've chosen and some of the outcomes of the study as well. So it is quite a journey and it's a little bit complex to share, but I am wanting to get the best bits. So I look forward to the questions after that. We're talking about learning in higher education. That is the key focus of what I'm working with. The work of leaders, the work that we have in fostering growth, and particularly focusing on new forms of scholarship and learning. I share an image there of myself in a virtual environment in the School of Information Studies, where we actually had a virtual campus for a period of time in one of our courses, as evidence of the sorts of variety of work that we're doing in technology. So while some people may only be working in CMS platforms, others of us have had to extend ourselves to work in a variety of areas. And this, of course, draws on my own professional experiences, and that's where my desire to research has come from. Keen to know more about this meaning of what a digital scholar is, and this is what we'll explore together. The work of us as academics, we know, is to support and nurture learners when it comes to learning and teaching. And there's a lot of discourse around this in the different disciplines, but I want to emphasise that my background comes from both education and information studies. So navigating information pathways, navigating pathways to knowledge is that merging of disciplines that drives my work, and which I think brings a different perspective to this investigation that is often presented in the education sector. Why is it important? Well, I was really interested to go back and have a look at what TEQSA is doing. For those of you from CSU, you well know that our EDRS performance requirements now include scholarship and digital scholarship work. It's part of our performance planning and our yearly outputs. There is now an increased and genuine focus on learning and teaching and design and delivery of courses. And this is something that wasn't present in our academic profiles quite so strongly in the past. TEQSA has also produced in October 2020 a guidance note on scholarship. And again, I emphasise these points of learning outcomes for students and graduates, the way that disciplines are taught and learned, the fact that there's this scope for creativity in the endeavours that we are engaged in, and it also relates to professional practice. So this is actually vital to who we are as academics. And it has become so vital, not that it wasn't ever vital before, but it wasn't acknowledged to the same extent. Technology is this hourglass that's been going down, growing in different ways. All of this, of course, since the emergence of the web. You know, we were in a really transformative period of time, 2020 now compared to 2000, when I was first working with academics and teaching them how to type in a URL code into a browser. It's really painful to think of those days. But this technology environment in higher education is an absolute passion for myself, but also a driver of what's happening at faculty. Senior leadership and institutional strategic plans are now acknowledging the significant pressures of what is involved in integrating technology and looking at ways of facilitating innovation and change in those contexts. Interestingly enough, the definition of what scholarship is that is used by TEQSA and many organisations globally, in fact, comes from 1990. Boyer's work focuses on discovery, integration, teaching and application. There is no mention of technology at that point. So, of course, there's been discussion since then as to what needs to be included in that basic premise of what's involved in technology. And one of those things is the enabling a use of technologies in that digital or in that scholarship practice, so making it digital. You can see I'm getting to that word digital scholarship, but the meaning of that has quite a checkered history, and how it's applied and what we can do with it is something that's part of the investigation that I was undertaking. We want to understand something more about our professional learning and our identity formation in how we work with these things, and the importance of the digital scholars' practices as a way of promoting staff and development is also another area that's explored. So I'm looking at discovery, integration, teaching and application combined with digital scholarship as the real meaning of scholarship. And this is the interpretation that TEQSA is now actually bringing into practice for us. So it's become formalised. In the space of time that I've been undertaking this PhD study, TEQSA has begun to acknowledge and formalise the very things that I was beginning to question as part of my study. So I thought that was pretty cool, but also interesting to see how important it was to dig deeper into this whole exercise. So you get an understanding of where my curiosity is coming from. There's a picture I took at a Denver conference in Denver, Colorado, a technology conference, of course, international technology educators, and it epitomises my career and my interests since the beginning of my journey. I think my next slide does have that. As Simon mentioned, I've got a history in education, in particular leading these school libraries, 80 school libraries across the Parramatta Diocese was one of the bigger roles that I had. A lot of work in education before I came to the university sector, quite by accident in 2010 or 11, can't quite remember when. So technology's been there since those early days, and it has spiked my interest. It has always driven my curiosity and has always allowed me to make the mistakes in the journey of learning with working with technology, wanting to achieve the best for the people that I'm working with, the teachers, the staff, the educators, the academics and the kids in primary, tertiary, secondary, whatever setting. We're all learning and we're all working together to understand technology integration. So yes, I've done the journey, I admit. I started the journey towards higher education with this mantra, don't panic. Now, I won't say put your hands up, who recognises that phrase, because I won't be able to see you, but it's been an important one in driving what I'm doing. So my introduction to technology was The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. In that era when computers were just arriving on the scene, Judy O'Connell doing some professional development on the weekend with the computing studies coordinator, and we were introduced to The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as a game. You can now go to the 30th anniversary edition and play that computer game and see the history and the story behind that journey. But what it taught me was the same experience that our learners today, as we take them through our courses and our subjects, have, is that not everybody learns successfully, and that we have to have strategies in place to support them in their learning. So when it comes to technology integration, we have to be at the forefront of technology integration to understand the cognitive challenges, the affective challenges that are confronting our students. I knew this well. I was the worst in the class. Out of 30 of the practitioners, I simply couldn't solve the problems. I often tell my students that one of my first postgraduate degrees, in my first assessment, I failed. And for those students who are failing that first assessment as they make the new journey, that's often a shock to discover that, yes, other people can actually trip along the journey. And tripping with a guide is what we need to do. So I won't submit you to some vogue on poetry, but some of this work is a little bit like that. It's a bit complexing and confounding. After a bit of investigation and I'm going to sort of take traditional approaches, I suppose, to investigating what happens with technology and scholarship, I actually ended up doing an autoethnography as a research method. An autoethnography is interesting. The auto allows you to use your own personal experiences. Auto describes what you're doing yourself, and graphy, if you like, describe and interpret your cultural context, your experiences, your beliefs and your practices. So ethnography would be something you'd be familiar with. So I chose the autoethnography approach, but I particularly chose the analytic autoethnography approach because not only does it privilege the individual as participant, but it also focuses on the traditional qualitative, rigorous methods of analysis as well. So I'm not doing an autoethnography, which is a narrative or a story or an evocative or emotional response to trauma. This is a traditional qualitative, rigorous approach, but using data which allows me to explore a focus on a group or culture, which is what you do in this methodology, but to actually expand the influence of the data to try and analyse further into the context of what is happening. So I needed to use that visible and active reflexive researcher approach to find insight into this broader phenomenon around technology and integration of technologies and scholarship. So I did undertake normal processes of research. I was reflective in the process, but I also did a lot of coding and research and analysis backwards and forwards to understand the professional world and the context within which I have been working, and to actually undertake several steps of the research which puts it into context for you more clearly. So this methodology allowed me to choose, or I chose to focus on the Anderson approach, which I felt was very rigorous and appropriate to the context. Obviously, I had full member status in my field. I was a lecturer, senior lecturer, course director throughout this process. I committed myself to analytic reflexivity. I was visible in what I was doing, including writing materials at the time of undertaking my study. I participated in dialogue with key informants within the same context to verify that I wasn't navel-gazing, to put it bluntly, but that I was actually undertaking some rigorous research, and certainly theoretical analysis was part of that process. So this is a really useful approach to investigating an area that is familiar to many people. There is a lot of research, obviously, around technology and technology integration, but there are dimensions of that which are very disparate, and one of those relates to that expression of digital scholarship. In the process of determining the focus of the research, I actually then had to refine the areas of the literature that I needed to grasp. And this was part of the really important process of drawing together the two strands of my discipline experience, both in education and all its nuances related to learning and teaching, and information studies and all the nuances related to information as product, information as knowledge vehicle and information as a process of seeking that through information behaviour. So the first of those areas that I drew on was the facets of, I can't actually see half of my screen, sorry, facets of information in digital contexts. And so I drew a lot of interesting courage almost from the notion of information as an ecology, because that expanded on the information behaviour, which to us in information studies is quite seminal, from 1991, Buckland's description of information as a thing, process and knowledge. So that you can see was already alluding to the areas that we work with in education and technology. The behaviours that we adopt in relation to those technologies are important. I also drew on the literature to analyse gap, the visceral process, the anomalous states of knowledge that we experience in information seeking activities. And of course, this knowledge engagement with information is a process of knowledge, is a process of using technology in the 21st century. Coupled with all this, the information research told me or gave me more information about that whole affective domain, our personal experiences and our reactions, our cognitive and affective responses within these processes of engaging information. So that was one bucket of research literature that was important to my research processes. So bringing these cognitive, affective characteristics of information and knowledge together, coupled with technology, became pivotal to my research interests. The next area was threshold concepts. They had fascinated me and I could see synergies with the work that I needed to do. So I dug into the meaning of threshold concepts. Many of you will be familiar with the work of Mayer and Land and the challenges that we experience in the mastery of any disciplinary and professional knowledge is what is worked through in the idea of threshold concepts. What was particularly interesting to me was the notion of liminal passage as we move through our scholarly experiences. There is a sense of doubt, there's a sense of experience, there's a sense of boundary crossing. So discipline knowledge and threshold concepts and acquiring discipline knowledge is considered important, but this liminal space of confrontation mimics that idea of gap and visceral knowledge and anomalous states of being, which comes through from the information studies field. So again, there's an area there that I needed to pull together to investigate further. Understanding how this applies to learning and teaching contexts and where that sense of liminality is a sense of gap and is a sense of emotional response to the information seeking and behaviours that we do. So it's getting entwined and rather a short explanation, but it leads to then the investigation of what digital scholarship is and what its meaning is. This to me was an extraordinary eye-opener, if you like. I had assumed, as many of us do, that we all know what digital scholarship is. Perhaps I was being naive, but yeah, I probably was being naive, but that's okay. But going back to that idea of Boyer's diet model, we discover, and the research tells us, and the literature tells us, that there's actually quite an inconsistency in the definitions of what digital scholarship is and what the practices are. So some of us, even in my own school, I know will talk of digital scholarship just in terms of scholarly publication. Others will understand it as open access and digital scholarship, therefore. People will refer to archiving strategies and the storing and dissemination of scholarship within technology frameworks. And so the conversation goes on. In other words, digital scholarship has broad implications and many aspects which need further investigation and needs to be better understood in the context of higher education if innovation and engagement and development of technology infrastructures and applications to learning and teaching can be achieved through the endeavours of the strategic plans and the leadership initiatives that are undertaken. So culture of innovation is what we want to drive what we do in higher education these days. But what it is that needs to support innovation is probably much less understood in my view. This led then, of course, to the sense of professional identity. Our professional identity in practice is what labels us as academics, but also what drives the way that we work within our context. And certainly for myself and others, self-efficacy, and the research literature tells us that self-efficacy is not just a process of specific skills, but it's also the way that we engage in professional practice and the cognitive and emotional approaches that we adopt within that framework of professional practice. Very complex area, which I'm not describing very well, but it does relate to that sense of work that we do with information and information sources and information technology, and how we work as effective mediators and facilitators of learning and teaching with our students. And once again, how that is part of who we are as professionals and as academics, and what is expected of us by the leadership and by the institutional expectations as we design and deliver courses and degree programs. So, you know, this is preaching to the converted, I suppose, but we know that we can only do what we're allowed to do. But sometimes expectations of us, or expectations that we may impose on others, has to be supported by strategic approaches that understand the underpinning structures that make us who we are. So that then led to the remaining part of the process. You know, where does digital scholarship practices work? What is the sense breaking and the liminality process that are important to our identity formation? And I find in the literature that there are a few studies that explore these unique subjectivities. I find that the individual confidence and keenness to work is another area that needs to be explored further. Let me just move that a little. Oh, I can see that better. Thank you. And so this whole idea of professional identity and individual agency that we bring to our work, when we're talking about not discipline knowledge, but we're talking about how we facilitate this in technology environments. Remember, I'm talking about online learning and teaching. I'm not talking about other aspects of academic work. Technology is an important aspect of that, clearly, and digital scholarship has to become part of that faculty development processes that we need to incorporate into that. So there's a problem. We need more work on that. So my method centered on online learning environments. It was a qualitative study, and it took place, there's two parts of it, but the one part of that took place while I was working in the Faculty of Science as a leader of online learning and teaching. So you can see where that's coming from. Questions asked of myself, finding myself as I'm doing a PhD to be in a situation that exactly provided me with research data, golden opportunity to explore this in detail in relation to not just an individual's practice, but also as an individual and a leader embarking within a faculty structure and a university structure, trying to facilitate innovation and change. So those are the dimensions of exploration. So I'm looking at locating my identity within that. I'm guided by my moral commitment to engage in serious qualitative research. It involves a focus on reflexivity, and there's certainly a deep sense of authenticity. How could it not be, since I was in the middle of that all the way through? So it was a wonderful, wonderful exercise in unraveling many of the nuanced feelings and experiences that we intuitively see happening around us, but which haven't been connected, reconnected, and positioned in any kind of authoritative or theoretical framework to understand what's driving our processes. So the research questions, of course, the main focus was what's the meaning, place, and impact of digital scholarship in learning, in leading online learning and teaching? What are the pathways of digital scholarship? What are the pivot points? And what are the influences on exploring digital scholarship and practices? My screen won't change. There we go. Good. using autoethnographic data from personal memory data. So actually I was able to use two pools of data. First of all, I had personal memory data. This is using the autoethnographic process, personal memory data, textual and other artifacts, a reflexive online journal, and some dialogic exchange with key informants. In other words, as part of the autoethnographic process, it's another way of validating your data is by talking about it and interviewing people who were within that same experience to see if you are still focusing your data correctly. So I sought a clearer perspective. This is not, I'm going to skip through this slide because we need to look at the time, and I want to show you the data that's emerged from that. I inserted lots of quotes during my thesis exploration, and it's the same thing it's the same approach that we need to take with our own learning and teaching approaches. We need to be curious, but we also need to be ready for the unexpected. So the bold opportunities, falling on the ground, and the weird questions that you get in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the approach to take all the way through. As a framework of analysis, and I haven't got a slide in there that shows you this, I need to do this earlier. Okay, my apologies. I also used a really good review of the research by Cho and others, which looked at research topics in online learning environments, providing a really in-depth summary of learners and instructors, participants, and others in micro level and macro level environments. So they ended up with 16 research topics grouped in those three themes, which gave me a jump start and a focus on online learning environments in my analysis. I did not do a grounded analysis. I wanted to actually connect my data and my theoretical explorations directly to the research that currently exists. That this provided me the first process in connecting my digital scholarship knowledge and habits to the research literature as it stands at the moment. She's getting tongue-tied. Here we go. This is the slide I really want to share with you. So breaking my research into three phases of research. The first phase I call the accidental academic because it spanned the years 2011 to 2016, where I became a lecturer and senior lecturer at Charles Sturt University. This was not part of my career progression, but that's where I ended up. At that time, I was still writing, or had been writing since 2006, an online blog. And so by taking the data from 2011 to 2016, I had existing personal memory data, which I could then use to set the scene and verify my identity and my position as an accidental academic and my understandings of what is going on as an academic in those areas. So taking that information, I could then set the scene for the next phase of the data analysis, which was then in 2016 to 17, which was the year of, or the period of time working in the Faculty of Science as a leader of innovation. So you can see the process I undertook there. Instead of just taking a year of analysis, or a bit more than a year, I think, I needed to position that quite seriously to make sure that the analysis that I undertook as an autoethnography as the digital academic in phase 2 of the research process was grounded in an understanding of my own personality, my own experiences, my own academic work, related to the literature, related to Cho's framework, the research topics, so that I had an absolutely solid approach to do the research. The reflexive journal during that period of time in the Faculty of Science, as you can see, the entries were from January 3 to October 3, so it's a bit less than a year. It represented a significant period of time, however, session 1 and 2, for those of you at CSU, which incorporates all the planning and the follow-through actions. And finally, interviews with my colleagues as well. The ethical considerations, you would all understand the processes that are involved in that. But what I wanted to make a point of is that in analysing and working with the data from my period of time in the Faculty of Science, part of the qualitative research approach and the work around that, it was essential that I note that I'm not making commentary on institutional collegiate knowledge or experiences, and I'm not making any negative comments in that sense. I'm purely contextualising my own work in that area. So in phase 1, in vivo analysis, collecting lots of data, analysing 304 text sources in the online blogs, using the CHO framework, creating thematic nodes built on the CHO framework around participant macro and micro level environments, aggregating and coding those resources led me to find that I observed, or that I had, a notable emphasis on technologies, 117. Have I got a nice table for you? I don't. You miss out, sorry. So there were 214 aggregated number of codes referencing 117 of, oh, this is very confusing and doing it without a table, my apologies. 93 macro level, 90 micro level, and out of those 117 referred to technologies in some way or another. So there's something going on there with technology. I did an exploration of key context words, and I found that technology, scholarship, digital scholarship, and higher education were the ones that were most frequently appearing in the work that I was writing about. These I was then able to explore, and using facets of information and professional practice, the two themes that emerged from those. And then I was able to capture my professional practice in higher education, going forward from that with a focus on learning, emerging in digital contexts as well. This is poorly explained. I understand this now. I will need to polish that. But it was very interesting to me that in the period of time, that large period of time, writing blog posts, which were purely my own reflective writing, my own contribution and thinking to the profession. So it was not shaped in any way by this data, by this PhD research focus. So I've got a really authentic examination of an academic practitioner who's working as a course director and as a leader, in an innovator and as a leader, ends up writing about technology, scholarship, digital scholarship, and higher education. So I have data that I could explore in depth to understand the meaning of that. Looking at keywords, I could also see that this gives you a nice keyword breakdown of the most important words that were used right through all those posts. And then drawing through all that analysis from across those all years, what I was able to do was, if I could only see my screen, just a sec, Simon, can't see the top of my screen. Learning, what does learning mean? And this began to be really important because I could see what learning, the sense of learning and what working with knowledge, information, building the capacity to think and to work within a discipline. You see the wording that's emerging on the left. What is learning? You can see that it's expanding and becoming from something personal and lifelong and fairly straightforward in 2012, becoming more complex, professional, related to more mobile technologies. And ultimately by 2016, you've got that online participatory kind of words emerging. And then what's learning about? Again, you can see emerging an understanding of what it is that's more complex. And you see the use of the word digital scholarship and social scholarship and digital literacies beginning to emerge in that period of time as well. Lovely in vivo analysis, the second cycle of coding facilitated further elaboration of what I could find using the CHO framework. And you can see that the coded things where technology and the learning content was connected to all those quite specifically and directly. which was a really good elaboration for the meaning of what was happening at that time. I think you'll all recognise the kind of experiences there. So I've got a real visibility of myself as an academic and practitioner. What I was really interested in also finding that there was an affective category, an emotional response to what was happening, which was part of the emerging scholarly voice. This was important because it helped me position my professional practice and to understand that the process of what I do to learn and teach and manage my digital processes is the same challenge as I use in transferring that information to others. That was the blog post phase. The phase 2 was an examination of what I did as in the Faculty of Science. The journal entries provided a response to triggers that I allowed to, so I responded to triggers of interest rather than having a formulaic approach of writing daily. So issues that emerged, items that were of particular interest, allowed me to reflect on what it meant to lead in online learning, what it meant to lead the creation of courses, of activities in online environments and supporting students to develop their work. So it was quite an interesting exercise, and I can see there were a lot of entries, but 215 coded entries referred to in my engagement with leading online learning. These were the dimensions of leadership that emerged: leading online, the digital disposition, the fact that I pivot in my thinking, the way that I engage with staff, the issues around leadership, and you can see uncertainty and understanding. 64 is quite the one that emerges really high amongst all this. So leading online learning is not a straightforward process of here's a plan, let's make everyone do this and then everything will be okay. I mean, we know intuitively that that's not how it works, but in actual fact, the process of leading innovation is far more complex, and we need to find more approaches to strengthen that understanding of what's needed. I used recursive analysis to go back to, remember I looked at learning in the first phase of data. I took that and took it further to see what learning action is and what it is in how it happens in the context and what it's about. So this is now going back to professional practice. So we've gone a journey through understanding information, to understanding technology, to looking at how we pull that through, working in my own processes as an academic, and now bringing it into my activities as a leader in online learning and the professional practice in action in that context. What does it mean for learning and teaching practice? And so I've got that analysis in the table there as well. This is what it led to ultimately, the building of the concepts in a nice little mind map. So leading online learning ended up having 3 particular focus areas for me: professional identity, professional purpose, and professional practice. So a lot of random words that I've said not very clearly to you so far, but this table, this mind map represents very clearly what the data pulled out for me in terms of how the process of leading online learning happens. No time to elaborate. The scope and dimensions of my work are reiterated again by capturing the nouns and verbs in the work that I'm doing. And it led to further dimensions around the scholarly question of, around how to apply the thematic coding to go now to explore the pathways of digital scholarship. So I asked the scholarly question, I looked at the threshold concepts and the boundary crossing issues, that whole liminality as a process, and I kept on that theme of digging into how we use and engage with information as a process of knowledge to create, curate, and participate. And that gave me another mind map related to digital scholarship. And this in itself is a whole area that I've done some presentations on, where digital scholarship, when you analyse it more deeply, there's actually some very key areas that need to be articulated and planned for. So it's no longer just the scholarship work that Boyer speaks about. It's digital scholarship, which incorporates the Boyer concept, if you like, of academic scholarship, information literacy, because we need to work with information sources and know how to find those information sources and interrogate information sources, and digital literacy, where you actually engage in your information seeking processes in online settings and so on. So digital scholarship for me became a far more nuanced explanation and understanding of what could be explained and written about, rather than the limited or compartmentalised expressions of digital scholarship, which we often see. This was then positioned by myself in terms of what I've been discussing earlier: professional purpose, identity, and scholarship. And so I built an understanding of what myself and what an academic working in the university, engaged in innovation, engaged in change and online learning and teaching, is going to be involved in two things: professional academic actions, in other words, how I do my digital scholarship and how that affects my professional practice and how I allow it to drive my professional practice. I describe that as being inward facing. And public academic actions, which is the identity that I display in my work, and the purpose of my work, the goals that I've been set by faculty, and the purpose that I work with, and the learning and teaching that I work with students. That's my outward facing intention. So you can see very simply a representation of some of my data work there. It's important to me to remember what individual agency is and professional agility is, and transactional agility. So in these areas of my personal academic actions and public academic actions, I also pulled out how these connected. So there were capabilities, 4 quadrants of my academic work that had really important link capabilities that deserve further explanation than you can possibly have today. But I want you to hang on to those, because individual agency, how you do and how you believe in yourself and how you engage with digital scholarship will build your professional identity. All these capacities are so important, but let me just drop it into a table for you. So you can see how I began to connect it. 4 quadrants: digital scholarship, professional identity, professional practice, and professional purpose. What was important to me in this research was that digital scholarship, or the focus of what I thought was my work initially, the digital scholarship actually doesn't exist itself. So you remember that mind map with digital scholarship, with academic scholarship, information literacy and digital literacy. It doesn't drive anything by itself at all, but it actually fits in with professional identity. It supports my individual agency and it makes my professional identity possible. It makes my, so functional agility, it makes my professional practice work. So those of us who use digital scholarship techniques well are those who have fantastic professional practices. And of course, we elaborate this in more detail in the data and in the analysis of the thesis, but you can see where it's going with this table, I hope. This to me is really, really important. These 4 areas connected together. So I said it's not autonomous, it's connected and it builds together. So then the academic conversation that we had, they also, I'm going to skip through some of this, but my 2 colleagues that I spoke with, they also were quality learning and teaching leaders in other faculties at the university. Just 3 of us. So there were just two others that I spoke to, but they were able to help me question, learn and refine what I was talking about. So the phase 3 analysis was a very active engagement. It allowed me to discuss further that idea of individual agency, functional agility in relation to professional practice, and it supported my deeper understanding, I think, of the issues that had emerged, particularly in the affective area. So, as one of my colleagues said, the biggest thing I think I find frustrating is the lack of common institutional direction in the area of online learning. And this was in relation to our discussions around digital scholarship. This comes from commentary that at the time is not a reflection on my own university, because we had plans in place. We were part of that plan. We were actioning that plan. But it's that lack of in what I describe later on, is that lack of understanding of what it means and where digital scholarship fits into that process. So the study allowed me to explore digital scholarship and position it into concept and practices of what I do, to come to some new understanding around what academic leadership and online learning and teaching is all about. And this is the full scope of the model that I've developed to represent the bulk of the thesis work, which needs to be written about, because it's drawing together connections that I had not found previously, connecting through information, studies research, through education research, pulling together threshold concepts, looking at the spaces of liminality to understand the gap, to understand our anomalous states of knowledge, and to understand where technology, actions and activities through using technology effectively fits into digital scholarship. So I had expected, as part of the research PhD, that I would end up with interesting information related to digital scholarship. I was pleased to find a better way and a new model of expressing digital scholarship through academic scholarship, information literacy and digital literacy. But I was also surprised to find that because of the cognitive and affective processes involved in professional identity, the self-efficacy that's involved in creating our individual agency to be effective digital scholars, and the functional agility that digital scholarship provides us in terms of our professional practice, that professional identity and professional practice were interlinked and made professional purpose either valuable, effective, quality roles, or not, depending on the professional development activities that were supported and the institutional responsibilities that were being laid upon myself or others in the work that we did. So leading online learning innovation, and this model showed me that there is a huge area of development that we need to undertake in terms of how we understand supporting innovation and change, how we apply the demands that TEQSA is asking of us in terms of understanding our scholarship and effectively creating courses and online learning experiences of students, that we need to structure that process and understanding in this way, that there is a personal and academic action that needs to be dealt with, which is an individual process that I need to work on through the support of faculty, but also the public focus of my work needs to be supported by my institution to make that all to come together in a synergistic approach. So the model, I believe, raises awareness of key facets that need to be investigated further. There's support for some theoretical and practical understandings of the digital scholarship and the elements of how that applies to leading innovation and change, and a lot of opportunities for extending research in areas of this by myself and others to understand both theoretical and practical applications of what we're going to do. So there is contribution to the research and to the practice. It's the practice that I'm particularly keen on seeing or taking forward in terms of our understanding of our professional identity. Our purpose and our identity is interlinked and needs to be supported from the get-go. So rather belatedly, I'll stop, but exactly said deep thought. So once you know what the question actually is, you'll know what the answer means. I wasn't aware of my question fully. I needed to ask a question, or I found an answer that wasn't just about digital scholarship. And I found that to be quite exciting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judy. Fascinating presentation. Yes, as somebody said in the chat, the answer isn't just 42, unfortunately. No. So any questions for Judy?
Can I just not present a question, but thank Judy for bringing this very, well, it's quite a different PhD. It's the first autoethnographic PhD that I've supervised, but to pull it together and to provide a contribution to theory and practice in an area of exploration within university, academic leadership in the online environments. I think she's done a brilliant job, but admittedly, I may be a bit biased, but thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Catherine.
Any other questions? I don't think I missed any questions. Oh, sorry, go on.
It's Hetty. Thank you very much, Judy. This is just fantastic. It's sublime, actually. I did a Doctor of Communication. I finished, I think it's 5 years ago now, and mine was an autoethnographic. And since then, I've been working with other colleagues in collaborative and duo ethnography.
Oh, wonderful.
And you explained how you went about the analytic autoethnography very, very well. And a lot of people kind of shy away from that. I know I've shied away from it a bit. I did use it in my thesis, but just that model that you've come up with is just, it's just fantastic. And it just resonates so much. And it just, because we're all at CSU, embedded in digital scholarship, it's really a model for our practice. And I just want to commend you. It's excellent.
Oh, and, thank you, Eddie.
I cannot wait to read your thesis. It's fantastic. Congratulations.
They're the words every PhD candidate dreams of hearing, aren't they? Somebody desperate to read your thesis. A comment from Mr. Terry, but I know it's not Mr. Terry, but I forgot who's
Laurie.
It's Laurie. That's right. There's mind blown. So much of your work really resonates with me as a TL practitioner, as well as in my beginning forays into teaching in the HE sector. And another one who can't wait to read your work when it's published. Any other questions for Judy?
No vogue on poetry.
It's Jenny here. It's not really a question. I just thinking how fortuitous it was that you had your blog for such a very long time happening before this started, because it gave a really unbiased, unfocused, the underpinnings for your work. And as a regular reader of that blog over many, many years, it influenced my practice. So it was fantastic to see it have such a really important role. And I love those three different perspectives that you brought to it. I think this is really exciting, and it brings a whole lot of different ways to think about how we engage online with our students, but also collegially as well. So great. We've so enjoyed this presentation. And yes, I want to read it too.
Thanks, Jenny.
Judy, it's Laurie again. I'm very excited about when this is published, sharing it at my school. Our professional learning team is working closely with our pedagogy team and really trying to pinpoint the reluctance around teachers engaging sort of in this space, like, breaking it up the way you have. I'm looking at this going, I'd love to use this in the senior secondary sector. Like there's so much applicability. It's not just, I know this is focused on higher ed, but there's
elements. You're right. I mean, I don't think you could share it as is, but I think what I've been delighted to find, to support my work and other people's work is a better understanding of what underpins the issues that we face. So we actually know the issues, and we all have all these strategies in place, and we never can quite work out why they don't quite work. And I think what the model does is actually give you a vehicle for analysis and exploration to understand why what we do can or can't work, and what approaches we might take to improve them. I think that's what we haven't had before.
Got 2 or 3 minutes left for any last questions or comments.
Also, if people can't wait to read your thesis, the paper by Esther Fitzpatrick and Sandy Farquhar is a really good paper as well. And I noticed that you'd cited that. Yeah. And that leads you into more of an understanding of the kind of autoethnographic approach.
Yeah.
And
Thanks, Heather.
Judy, this is Catherine here. You won't have seen that in the chat. Ange had to leave halfway through, and she's made a comment that she loves your metaphors that you're going through. And she's also consider publishing the Journal of University Teaching and Learning Practice.
Yes.
It should be wonderful. Sandra thinks your work is stimulating. These are all people on your panel, which is fabulous. This work is stimulating and reflects very deep thinking. I'm so proud for you, Judy. And so Sandra says, she's looking forward to reading more. And Helena had to go to another meeting, but she says, well done, Judy. So
that's good.
This is so affirming, and from your colleagues as well. I'm very, very proud for you.
And thank you everyone for coming along too, because it's always an interesting exercise, isn't it, as you all know, to try and explain something complex in a short space of time. It was a bit of a dodgy job, but we'll get there.
Very good. Well, thank you, everyone. What an uplifting hour that was, and such fabulous comments as well. Well deserved, Judy. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you, Simon.
And thanks, everyone, for coming. See you all next time.
Thank you for hosting it too.
My pleasure.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.